Our brother Cam is from Southern California, formerly a little bit closer in Arkansas. He's going to be talking about a spiritual medley throughout the week, and his first class is entitled The Name.
Again, and greetings, everybody. It's good to see you here this morning. Now, this is on the last slide, so I'm going to have to escape real quick. It's going to go that way, exit, and start at the beginning. I don't want to give all the answers away before we get there, see. There we are now. Run this, perfect. So I'll keep messing with it until something breaks again. You know, I'm in technology, but sometimes it's like, All right, so I'm going to introduce kind of how this came to be. I didn't build this to be a talk. Initially, I was transcribing the scriptures. And I started in Genesis because it's a great place to start. And I didn't even start with, oh, by the way, I'm Cam. I'm from San Diego. I bring you brotherly greetings from the San Diego Ecclesia. And thank you for allowing me to come here and share, something I'm excited about and several things I'm excited about. And I hope you find value in them. So now I was transcribing the scriptures, and I was starting in Genesis 1 because Genesis 1 is a great place to start. And as I was writing, I realized that there are things in the scriptures that maybe aren't meant to be anglicized, that I wanted to understand if I should actually put like names that were the real names in, if I should transcribe numbers into metric and standard, or should I leave them in the kind of Hebrew rendering and the Hebrew measurements. Oftentimes the root words actually are intended to bring specific meanings that when we anglicize them, when we bring them into our standards of measure, you actually lose some of the clues that are in the scriptures, because the scriptures aren't always just overtly expressed. Sometimes, and I think most of the time, the deeper messages are actually embedded, and so you don't get the deeper messages if you kind of translate into our language some of those things. So I spent quite a bit of time looking at that, and the thing that came out to me was some of the things with the names of God, some of the patterns that arose, and that was just something that I started keeping notes on it, and before I knew it, somebody was like, well, that sounds really interesting. Have you thought about doing a talk? And I was like, well, I'm pretty close. I've actually got most of it documented. And so, and it was with a lot of research, looking at rabbinical studies, looking at some ancient Hebrew and this type of thing. And this is the culmination of that study. I find it adds a lot of value to me personally. I don't tell people you've got to follow my way of seeing and thinking, but I want to share with you what I've discovered. And maybe that'll be something that will start a journey in your mind and your heart as you read the Word of God, because it's not something exposed in English translation. So we're going to start with the name and a little bit of discussion around the name. So I've introduced myself. What is my name? Cam. So okay. So I did introduce myself. My name is Cam. And it's interesting because what does Cam mean? Well, it doesn't really mean anything. There are guys with the name of Cam. There are girls with the name of Cam. It doesn't have an embedded meaning. When you hear my name in English, you don't think of some other thing. Now, I do know in some languages, Cameron, if you said Cameron, that would be Spanish for shrimp. So we just can forget that right now. And then I think it's like in Irish or Gaelic, it means bent nose, which isn't all wrong. I do kind of have a bend right there, but being named Cameron didn't give me a bent nose. But I had the privilege of being in Africa, and oftentimes names mean something, right? You'll have somebody. I was in South Africa, and it was a person's name would mean faith or happiness or belief, or it would mean second, so you could pretty much guess that they weren't the first child, or last, right? Because that was mom saying, no more. But the names all meant something. And so it's interesting seeing, different cultures do different things. Hebrew definitely is a depth of name, right? A depth of meaning in the name language. So when you look at people's names in the Hebrew, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next class as well, names mean something. Now, where does our Creator first introduce himself, right? Our Creator first introduces himself in our scriptures in Genesis. We get an introduction of what God is, and kind of who God is. And actually, what's interesting, if you look at the first chapter, not right now, you'll find that the first chapter is Elohim, 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 the Hebrew word for mighty one or mighty ones. And the second chapter, it's not Elohim, it's Yahweh Elohim, right? It's an introduction of who God is, but it's not an explanation of who God is. And an interesting question is, does our Creator intend for to be known, and does he intend for his name to be known? And we're going to cover that today, because the answer to that question is, before we get there, yes. God actually says, this is my name, and this is what I expect the people who know me for generations and generations to follow, to know me by this name, which is an interesting expression of intent. And then the question is, where does our Creator proclaim his holy name? Where does he expound on his name? And we're going to follow that today as well. And that's in Exodus 3, about 12, 13, 14, 15. And then I'm going to ask a question to you. When we talk about our Creator from a biblical standpoint in the English language, what is the word that we use for him? And there's several, but what is, somebody pop up with one. What's one of the common words that we use for our Creator in the Scriptures? God. What else? Father. Jehovah. Lord. Right? And it's this, I want to kind of draw down on this conversation, right? And we're going to start right here. So the first conversation, the first thing in my studies that I looked at is identifying the things that were describing what he is versus describing the things that versus identifying the things that describe who he is. Because there is a distinction, right? When you get to Adon or Adonai, that is talking about, when you look at the Hebrew and Hebrew studies on that, that's talking about someone who is I'm going to use the word Lord in defining Lord. It's someone who has authority broadly, right? Someone who has authority broadly. Oftentimes the Adon can even mean armies, the authority over armies. So it's someone who is definitely an authority. You got, Elohim with the mighty ones, which has its own context. Which I'm going to elaborate here. Elohim is used almost 7,000 times in the Scriptures. In some translations, it's used one time, only one time for angels. In all the other translations and all the archaic translations, it's never used for angels. Elohim is never used in reference to angels. However, it is used for gods, so it's a what conversation. What are you, right? And gods have a very specific intent. So the God idea is something that is self-sustaining, that has authority and power over, right? And when God speaks of gods, he says, how many gods are there? One. There's only one that has power. There's only one that has authority. There's only one that's self-sustaining, right? But when referring to the belief of non-believers, pagans, whatnot, when they have beliefs in entities or deities, he refers to that as Elohim as well. Now, the one other scenario where Elohim comes in is with people. And there are 2 or 3 examples of that. One of, not the least of which is, if you can think about Jesus when the Pharisees are saying, so you're saying that you are God, and Jesus says, have you not read that ye are gods? Well, he's speaking Greek, but he's not making this up. It's actually Psalm 82, and Psalm 82 is Elohim. So what Jesus is actually saying to them in Hebrew is, have you not read that ye are the Elohim? And I think, okay, that's interesting, right? They're accusing him of saying that he is God because he's related in a way to the heavenly Father. And he's saying, but haven't you read that ye are the Elohim? That's the word that he's leaning on. So Elohim has an interesting place. But Elohim is not a name. And I think that's the point that I bring. Elohim is not a name. It's not the name of God. It's what he is. He's describing. And several of the titles around our Lord God are titles. They're expressions of what he is, not an expression of who he is. So I think we did this. Elohim, meaning and origins, mighty ones, plural form. I think, depending upon kind of which versions, you're getting about 6,700 references to Elohim in the Scriptures. Elohim, as you've probably heard, is a plural just by and by, not part of the exhortation at large. But Elohim is a plural Hebrew word, but it's used 4 times out of 6,700 and some odd times. 4 times it's used in plural context in the scripture, only 4 times. The word is not intended to imply plurality. It's intended to imply a kind of a dynamic, undefinable nature. And that's, if you look at rabbinical studies, over and over they're going to come back to saying it's because, let me give a contrast to best express, because I'm not a linguist. The word for sky is plural. The word for waters are plural. So if you have one glass of water, that glass of singular water, which would be singular in context, the word for water is plural. I believe it's mayim. The word for the sky, I think, is shemayim. It's plural. But the significance is, if I take that one glass of water and I pour it, and I've got 2 glasses of water, it's plural. It's the same amount of water. The water hasn't changed, but it's gone from a singular to a plural. If you look at the skies, they're never the same. And it's not that the skies are, the plurality of the skies is not in the fact that there's multiple of them. It's that they're always changing. Every time you see them, they're different, right? Unless you live in San Diego, in which case it's pretty much always just sunny. But the significance of the Hebrew in the plural use of the word like that is that it's not a question of whether it's singular or plural. It's a question of your view of it. Now, how many people see God exactly the same way you saw him when you were, half your age? Anybody see God the same way? He changes, right? Has God changed since you were half your age? Anybody think God has changed? Now, we all know that the real story that's going on is not that God is changing. It's that he's changing us. We see him different. And as a matter of fact, we can see him differently day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. God never changes. But our perspective of God changes. So in a sense, following the use of plurality in the Hebrew, he's always changing in our eyes. It makes sense for his, this descriptor of him to be plural, because he always looks different. He always plays, he seems to be playing different roles as we learn to observe God's interaction in our lives. And that's in keeping and very common with the Hebrew language. And that was an interesting thing for me to discover after being in arguments over singular God, plural God, and all that. And then I look at, kind of the Hebrew and Hebrew, Hebrew speakers and specialists in Hebrew linguistics. And they're like, no, that's not what that means. It doesn't mean that he's plural at all, right? So we talked about literally God's in common use 3,000 times, not 7,000, sorry. Also used for men in authority, and we talked about that. So I want to talk about Lord. So in English, we're not talking in Hebrew yet, Lord is used very specifically. We're going to talk a little bit about where it comes from, but I'm going to propose to you that Lord, using Lord as a descriptor for our God or for his name, is actually masking the meaning. And that wouldn't be so troublesome, because translation does give you things that mask the meaning, and maybe not with intent. But if it's something that's intended to be known, if we're supposed to know something about it and then we mask it, then it makes it very difficult for us to see what God is trying to communicate. So in the scriptures, general translation rules are that if you have the Lord, if you have his name come up in the Hebrew, that they're going to use all caps. So Lord, all caps. But I'm going to propose to you, I'm sure everybody here, or most people, have probably heard of Lord Cavendish. It's a person who actually, is in England or has been in England. It's a very popular name, this particular person. Is Lord his first name? Okay, you can say it out loud. Is Lord his first name, yes or no? No, Lord is not his first name. What is Lord? It's a title. Now, Cavendish is his name. Lord is a title, right? And it comes from something. It isn't just, we didn't just make it up. It comes from the system of lords. Now, L-O-U-R-D-E-S, lords, but it comes from the system of lords. So in the system of lords, in order of their authority, right? In order of their authority. What is the order of the title Lord in the British system hierarchy, the system of lords? Where is Lord? Is it at the top or is it at the bottom? So King James was rather British, right? He was in charge of basically sponsoring the writing of the first English Bible that got distributed to people around the world, right? And in his Bible, which I'm very pleased that there was an English Bible that got distributed around the world, don't get me wrong, and this isn't a knock at the King James Version, it's really a knock at English translation, but for some reason, the guy who's at the top of the system of lords sponsoring the writing of the Bible, when the name of God came into being, they replaced it with the lowest title in the system of lords. Not the middle one, not the one just under him, but the lowest one. And that to me is interesting, because there's no question in my mind that when that text was written, that the British translators knew exactly what that word meant in their language, in their culture. So I just have to ask the question, what were they thinking? So Lord is used for a lot of different things. Now we get the translation out of the Hebrew, and so we see kind of the culture of the Hebrew people in the discussion, but Lord can be used for head of households, it can be used for visitors, it can be used for landowners, it can be used for anyone who is given authority over you, and it can be used to show respect. So you kind of get a conversation with Abraham when the three men came to visit him, right? And he referred to them as Lord, and initially he referred to them as Lord as seemingly as a form of elevating their stature. They were his guests, and so he elevated them and he demonstrated respect. Now, one of the interesting things that happens in that particular dialogue, which I'm not going to talk about right now, is that then he begins to use the word Yahweh with one of the people he's talking to, which is quite interesting because Yahweh is not a title. It's a name, right? And so he's not calling all three of them Yahweh. He's having a dialogue with one, and one of the three he's referring to as Yahweh, which is like, the things that make you go, So I don't know that I have anything that I would stand up and say, this is what's going on, but it's definitely interesting because he's identified a personality that he's speaking to, and he's calling them by name. But he doesn't start that way. He starts by referring to them and elevating them because they are his guests. So now I want to introduce you to the name, and I really actually do want you to turn to Exodus 3 if you have a Bible with you, Exodus 3:13 through 15. And there's some very, very interesting things that happen in Exodus 3. Most of them aren't obvious in the text. Most of them you have to start getting into rabbinical studies and all this stuff to see how they break out. But there's enough in the basic Hebrew. If you haven't been exposed to Hebrew, I'm going to share it with you. But the dialogue that's happening is Moses is in a discussion with God, Yahweh, the Elohim, and Moses is like, well, you're sending me this people, you're sending me to your people here in Egypt, but as I go to this people who are in Egypt, I'm going to have to tell them who it is that sent me. I'm going to have to explain to them, not just who. If you say, I need to be able to say who it is that sent me, you're not just talking about name, right? What else are we talking about, right? If you want the people to listen to you and pay attention to you, then there's got to be some basis of authority, some basis of position that the words you're given to share will be paid attention to. And that if there's instruction, that they will be followed. People aren't going to follow instruction unless there's authority that drives that discussion. So when Moses is asking God, who am I going to tell this people is sending me to them, right? This is the dialogue we're having. And God is, what does God say? He says, well, you tell them that I am, this is English, has sent you to them. I am. But this is the part where I want to pull out the threads. I want to talk about the Hebrew I am. Because I am comes from the Hebrew word haya. And this is where things start to get really profound really, really fast. When you pronounce it as haya, and that's actually the letter. The word hey, that little jot thing, is a yod, yah, a y, if we think about it in English. So it's like an H, a Y, and an H. Hayah. There's no A in there. Hebrew doesn't have an A. And this, we're going to kind of break this apart just a tad. So something happens here. What's actually written is Hayah, Asher, like one of the 12 tribes, and Hayah. But Asher means, we're actually going to get there in a second. It means, well, let me just start with my order. Hayah means to be, or it means I am, which is pretty interesting because Asher kind of means within or inside or an affirmation by implication. So it's I am or to be inside of or within I am. But this is kind of weird, right? If Moses is like, so who am I going to, what name am I going to tell them? By what basis of authority? And he says, well, I tell you what, to be within to be. Does that make any sense in English? Tell them that to be within to be, or tell them that I am within I am, right? That doesn't make sense in English, but what this translates to in Hebrew is an affirmation. It's a profound affirmation. So he's expanding on a concept, and this I am is the concept of existence. So I'm not going to go in depth in this, but when Jesus is being challenged by the Pharisees, and they're like, how can you say before Abraham that you were? I mean, you're not even 50 years old yet, and he's obviously more than 50 years away. And then are you saying that you're greater than? And at the end, he says, before Abraham was I am, and a lot of people translate that, or they think that those two things are the same, but that in the Greek and this in the Hebrew are not the same. Jesus is kind of making a point about his position in the creation in God's plan in contrast to Abraham. But the profession that God is making here is completely different. And we're going to get to that really, really close, or really, really quick. I keep wanting to go ahead and just go there, and it's like, I can't do that yet. So here we are at this point. The significance of this particular passage has multiple different dimensions to it. The first of which is Hebrew can have a timing text. It can have current tense. It can have past tense. It can have future tense. But in this particular piece of dialogue, there's no tense. It's not past tense. It's not future tense, and it's not current tense. Now, English is a very precise language. Right? English is a very precise language. Greek can be a very precise language. A lot of Western languages, the language actually has ways of getting to very, very, very precise singular meanings, but Hebrew is actually the flip of that. Hebrew is a wide open language. Hebrew has the ability to communicate many things at one time. And oftentimes the difficulty of translators is they're trying to tell you what the Hebrew person in a precise language when the Hebrew is not trying to be precise. It's trying to actually be very broad. And this is one of those places where we go from this happened then, this happened then, this happened then, what is your name? And my name is not current, not future, and not past. And so the English translators say, well, which one should we make it? And if you look at enough translations, you will see I am who I will be, or I am who I was, or who I was is who I will be, and it's because the translators don't know where to start. Which one of them is it? And the answer is yes, right? There's actually a place in Revelation where we see the name of God, but it doesn't tell us it's his name. It translates the meaning out for us. And you already know it. It's Revelation 4:8. There's about 4 or 5 in Revelation that do this. And it says, the one who was, who is, and who is to come. That's Yahweh. God is not saying I am. He's saying, I am the existent one. From when? Yes. Not from now, not from the future, not from the past. I am the existent one. It's like saying, don't try to bind me in time. The way the expression is happening is the one, does God change? No. The God who was, who is, and is to come is an unchanging God. He's the same God because we're seeing him in our time. He is not changing because he's across all time. When he communicates to Moses, one of the things he's communicating here is, I'm the one from now and to. That's why the people should listen to you, because the one who is from now and to is telling you to tell them this. I'm here for them, and they will follow me. So, and that by itself is phenomenal, because in the Hebrew, if you read this without the timing, without the tense, you would pick that up, right? You would pick that up. And Moses picks that up. He understands what God is saying. He is the creator. The source of life flows from him. He's the only one who is. That's why I am, or to be, the existent one, is sufficient as a comment, because no one else is an existent one. We're all derived. We all come from our creator. But he doesn't come from anyone. We come from him, right? And when someone who is the author of our very being speaks to us, I bet we listen. We care to know. And that's what the authority that Moses was going to carry back to the people. So yeah, I told you I would skip forward. So that's the translator dilemma. They're trying to figure out, and that's why we get I am who I am, or I will be who I will be, is because they don't know how to manage the tense, because it's so much packaged in so little. And remember, when Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am, to express himself as a deity, as the deity, he would have to have said, before Abraham was, I was, he would actually have to say, I was before Abraham, I'm now, and I will be in the future. All three of those things would have to be combined for him to be expressing or self-expressing deity. And that's not what he said. So what he's saying is clearly something different. It's just the convenience of the English language and the translator outcomes that seems to combine those two things, and they look the same. But it's not how it is spoken. It's not how it would be read and understood in the presence of the discussion. So our Creator is all time, even now. So now I've caught back up on where I am. Now this is, to me, very interesting. So one of the things, as I was studying this for my own studies, is in the ancient Hebrew doesn't actually look like the form that we have written up. A lot of the letters look like animals and shapes of, like doors, like the Ha still has the door shape. But the ancient Hebrew doesn't look the same. There's a middle Hebrew, which is where we pull some of the letters out of. What we see as Hebrew today is Middle Hebrew, or its most recent Hebrew, which has Masoretic texts, diacritic marks, which the Masoretes actually added to the language to kind of lock the language in, which was pretty brilliant, actually. But in the ancient Hebrew, Haya and Hava, they look the same. One's a Yod and one's a Vav, which we'll see in a second, are very, very, very similar. The two actually, in the right frame of speech, the two actually are kind of overlapping. So if you see one in the ancient Hebrew, it would imply the other, right? And we're going to talk about that. So where you see Haya, Asher, Haya, when Moses is listening to God declare himself, he's hearing Haya, Asher, Haya, which is the existent one, right? Profoundly the one who exists, from whom all things come. He's also hearing Hava. Now, in the current Hebrew, this doesn't really work this way, but in ancient Hebrew, it does. So the Hava, however, means something completely different. The word Hava means breath. So Hava, to breathe. So then what you get, if Haya, Asher, Haya is the emphatic for the existent one, then what is Hava, Asher, Hava mean? What is to breathe, or the breath within the breath? If it's an emphatic form, what does that mean? So what that expresses, just like the one who is, from whom all things come, if I'm also the breath. Where's the first time we see breath in the scripture? Okay, this is your turn. Oh, it's before Genesis 2:7. Genesis 2:7 is a great one. It's 1:2, right? Because when God speaks is the first breath. Now, this isn't necessarily a correlation in English, but when you're looking at Hebrew, it's definitively correlative. In other words, it definitively connects. So when you talk about when God breathes, when God speaks, right? Speaking is a function of breathing. In the Hebrew mind, they know that breathing and speaking together, right? So when you talk about a being who says, I am the breath, and yet our creation is a function of his breathing a word, right? He's saying something, right? And that's what he's saying. The breath. Now, what is the breath in? It's in our creation. Where else is the breath? 2:7. Where's the breath? Exactly. Okay. So I'll say it out loud because I saw a couple of gestures. The breath is right here, right? We aspirate, we breathe, we take it in, we exhale it. Do plants breathe? Yeah. Basically, if it lives, it breathes. If it's in water, it breathes. If it's on the land, it breathes. If it exists, it breathes. Some way or the other, if it's a living thing, it takes oxygen in or takes something in to live, right? And it's interesting because God is saying, I am the breath, right? Then by implication, from which all breath comes, right? And all breath goes. I think of an interesting scripture in Ecclesiastes. I'm sorry, I'm stepping away from the mic, and that may be good. So God is the breath, the source of breath. Breath comes from God, breath returns to God. There's a place in Ecclesiastes where Solomon makes makes kind of the statement, and he says, the breath comes from God, the breath returns to God, and who knows whether or not in this one place, who knows whether or not the breath, where the breath goes. And Solomon's not saying he doesn't know. He does know. He's leaving something out there for us. We know the breath comes from God. Who knows where the breath returns? Well, I know where the breath returns because I know what God's name is, right? The name is emphatically the source of all breath, the origin of it, the destination to it. You see, all breath comes from God and all breath returns to God. Now, here's the interesting thing. When Moses heard Hayah Asher Hayah, I am the existent one through whom all existence comes, and he hears also Hava Asher Hava, the breath from whom all breath comes and from whom all breath returns, through whom the words are spoken that creates all things, and he hears all of that in one name. And that is pretty amazing when you think about it. What God is saying when he introduces himself to Moses is profound, and it's full of meaning, and that meaning is intended to be known. It's intended for us to know it. It's intended for us to recognize him as our creator, as the origin and source of our breath. I even think at the time of Genesis 2:7, which was pointed out, that the first thing that man does when he takes a breath, whether it be a little boy or a little girl and give him birth, and the first thing they do, it's not cough out air, it's take in air. And what's the last thing that happens in a person's life? Right? It's the release of the same breath. Breath starts in and goes out. Here's something that as I was playing around with the name and looking at it, and I was kind of seeing what patterns exist in the name. So the top one is Hey Yod. Hey, that's a Yod, which is a Y, so that's Hayah Asher Hayah. The next one is, you see that long is a Vav. Hey Vav Ha. You can kind of see how they almost look the same. There's a lot of similarities. And the diacritical marks obviously added layer. So emphatically the existent one, emphatically the source of all breath, and the source of creation, the power and authority of creation. And so when you combine the two, it's kind of like saying there's no time constraints on him. He's eternal, he's immortal, he's a sustainer of all life, the creator of all things. That's what you get when you hear both of those things at the same time. That's what Moses heard. Think about where he goes next. I'm going to go talk to the people who sent you. The one who created all things gave you life and breath, through whom you exist. And when you are done, all of your energy and life and breath will return to him. That's the one who sent me to talk to you. Right? But I noticed something, because these letters are quite interesting. So you combine this, and they would actually read from right to left. That's Hayah Hava. And then if you join these two things, what do you end up with? Yod He Vav He. Now, Yod He Vav He is the word we know as Yahweh or Yahweh. In the Hebrew, it's almost like a Germanic W, the V sound. We say Yahweh, but they don't use a strong W, they use a V sound. So it would look in English like Yahweh, except now something else comes into play, and this is quite interesting. So Hebrew has 5 letters. This isn't really Hebrew study, but Hebrew has 5 letters out of, I want to say it's 22 letters total, and these 5 that are aspirational. And what that means is they're breathing sounds. They don't have consonant vowels, they have consonants, but 5 of their consonants, in the way we think of letters, 5 of their consonants are aspirational. They're breath. And the sound that you give them, right, whether it's an ah or eh or whatever that is, comes from the consonant that it's connected to. It doesn't have its own sound. It's a breathing or an aspirational sound. So it's influenced by whatever consonants are next to it. In the word Yahweh or Yahweh, those 3 letters, right, are all aspirationals. 3 of the 5, they're all aspirational, which actually is quite interesting. So it's interesting because nothing gives them a sound. We presume Yahweh as the sound of God's name. We presume Yahweh is the sound of God's name. And there's kind of a reason for that. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But this is kind of interesting. So Yod is a breathing sound, Vav is a breathing sound, He is a breathing sound, and as a letter it represents breath. So Haya, literally, if you take a deep breath and let it out with your mouth open. That's very, very close to the sound of Haya. That's it, right? And in the Hebrew mind, right, in their cultural memories, Haya is the sound of breathing. If you actually say, is there a word in Hebrew that is the breathing sound? Oh, yeah, Haya. Haya is the breathing sound, right? But what's interesting is Hava is the verb to breathe. So Haya sounds like breath and is the breathing sound. He is the letter that represents breath, and Hava means literally to breathe. And so we get into the question of how do you really pronounce Yod He Vav He? And when you look at rabbinical studies, they say, well, really, in Hebrew, you don't. That word doesn't pronounce because there's no consonant sound to base the aspirationals off of. What does it sound like? Well, really what it sounds like is breathing. His name sounds like breathing. What breathes? All living things breathe. It's like God has imprinted his name in our breath. When you inhale, you begin part of the conversation. When you exhale, you complete the name. Yod He Vav He. So our breathing speaks his name. And that's not necessarily an original thought to me. That's presented in lots of places. But you have to look for them to see them. I remember a Rob Bell thing when I was first introduced to the concept, and then as I began to study the rabbinical studies, I saw that all over the place. One of the main thinkings around the name of God is that you don't have a pronunciation. But when push comes to shove, and they're like, well, if you have to pronounce his name, how would you? And Yod He Vav He, Yahweh, is probably the common accepted pronunciation. And yet, often the rabbinicals would say, it isn't actually a pronounceable Hebrew word. So here's our concluding thoughts. God is the existent one, the only one who is. He's in all time at one time. In other words, we think of God progressing through time like we do because that is our experience. But imagine if God is at this moment in his time still working with Adam and Eve. Imagine if at this moment God is also, taking the keys to the kingdom from Jesus and making all in all. Imagine if God sees all of that and he's in all of those details, not bound by our time at all, right? He's not telling us what's going to happen. He's telling us what he's seen. He knows the end from the beginning because he knows the end from the beginning, not because he's like an extraordinarily good guesser and ultra smart, which he isn't extraordinarily ultra smart. But that's not what he's saying. He's telling us These are the things that are going to happen. You're going to experience. The next generation is going to experience. I'm working in them right now. Think about that, God, right? That is profound. Source and destination of all life and breath in him. And Yahweh is the combination of what we see in Hayah and Hava. Yahweh is the combination of those two things. And that's why we see it through the scriptures, but that's what's so profound about Exodus 3:13 is that's the introduction. That's where the name explanation actually originates. So this is a couple of things I want to take from that as examples. And I'm about to close, about to wrap this conversation up. And the name is profound in its many ways. And the more I think about it, the more I see it, the more I recognize it's more profound than it was the last time I thought about it. It's beautiful. But here's something that happens, and this is kind of the Hebrew name game. There are two places in Jeremiah where this conversation comes up. It talks about the one who comes from David, who will rule over Jerusalem, who will save his people, and he shall be called the Lord our righteousness. Now, we don't know how profound this is because this is very English. But that word, well, let's start with righteousness. Who wants to guess what the word righteousness in Hebrew is? You know this word, absolutely. As soon as I say it, you're going to be like, uh-huh. We know it in a name that's the King of righteousness. Melchizedek, right? That's the word. The word righteousness in Jeremiah is Zedek. Now, we're looking for someone who will be our King of righteousness and our King of peace, right? The King of Salem, the King of Zedek, the King of righteousness. But the Lord here, and by the way, "the" is attached to Lord because that's the only way to make the title work, but there's no "the" in the actual Hebrew. The word there for the Lord is Yahweh, and he shall be called Yahweh Zedek. That's what the Hebrew says. He shall be called Yahweh Zedek. Now, if you play the word game and the name game in the Hebrew, right, we are called then to Melchizedek. Yahweh is our king and our God, but we're also called to the word Yahweh, which is someone who has authority over life and breath. Now, we know that the son of David is Jesus. So this is interesting because this name is placed on Jesus. It's not something he had from the beginning of time. It's something that God, who is Yahweh, has placed on Jesus. And this is where this kind of starts getting fun. Now in Jeremiah 33, when it says the Yahweh our Zedek or Yahweh Zedek, it's not talking about Jesus. It does introduce that the son of David will come and will rescue his people. And then it says, and Jerusalem shall be called Yahweh Zedek. Now this is interesting. Jerusalem, the city of the Lord, the footstool of God, so to speak, right, is going to be referred to as Yahweh Zedek. But Jerusalem isn't talking about the city walls, is it? Jerusalem is talking about God's people. It's at his heart. It's his family. It's where the physical temple stood, but the spiritual temple is his community of believers, his family. And it's placed over Jerusalem. But Jerusalem is used in another place in Galatians, which I find quite interesting. Jerusalem is from above. She is our mother. So this is a spiritual conversation that Paul is having with his people. And is there a question? Okay. So it's a conversation Paul is having where he's talking about the difference between Sarah and Hagar. And one is representative of Egypt, and the other one is representative of Jerusalem. And now he spiritualizes the conversation. Jerusalem is from above. So it's not just the Jerusalem, it's the Jerusalem from above. So this becomes a metaphor. And she is our mother. Now there's another place where this kind of comes up, and it's Revelation 3:12, names in this, right? And this is a beautiful conversation where, for the one who overcomes, I will make him to be like a pillar in the temple of our God, right? And if you're a pillar in the temple, what happens? It does say, that shall never be removed. But what happens if you have a pillar? A pillar is a weight-bearing edifice. If I go into the middle of a building and the weight-bearing, is all on this pillar and I remove the pillar, what happens? right? Temple falls in. God says, my temple doesn't fall, right? You are going to be like a pillar, a weight-bearing object in my temple. You will never be removed, right? And then he says, right? And then he says, and I will place on you, right? And this is actually words coming from God through Jesus, through his angel to John. And he says, and I will place on you the name of God. What is the name of God? Is the name of God Lord? I'm going to place on you the name Lord. Is that what he's saying? Mm-mm. I'm going to place on you the name of God. But what is the name of God? Right? Yahweh, the source of breath, power, authority. What is he going to place on you? The name that implies power, authority, breath, life, right? Existence. And I'm going to place on you the name of the New Jerusalem from above. Oh, well, what's the name of the New Jerusalem from above? Yahweh, Zedek. And I will place upon you my new name, this coming from Jesus. What is Jesus' new name? Yahweh, Zedek. God is Yahweh, Zedek. Jesus, Yahweh, Zedek. Jerusalem, Yahweh, Zedek. Here's an interesting thing. God is our Father. Jesus is our... If God is our Father, what is Jesus? Our brother, right? So let me say that again. God is our Father. Wow, you guys. More coffee. Jesus is our, and Jerusalem is our. Well, if we've got our mother, our father, and our brother, we're in the family, right? What is God saying? I'm giving you the name of the family because this is the community of believers. Now, I love Habakkuk 2:14. For all the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That day comes when everyone we see is a manifest expression of the glory of our Father, right? And we look at each other when we're brothers and sisters, and it's a profound day of family when the earth is full of family who all have God's name on them. And that's an amazing day, and soon to come by all accounts. And that's what we have to look forward to. So the peace I leave you with, as he does say, this is the name that I give you so that you will remember me from generation to generation. This is the name that I have given you so that I will be remembered by this name from generation to generation. He has given it for us to know. He wants us to know him by his name, right? Not by the translated word. We're going to use the other because it's convenient, but remember the name was given with purpose. Because when we look at that name, now that I know this, I never look at that name the same. Every time I read, every time I pray. Amen.